Welcome to Presentation 7 in the series where we're looking at the book of Deuteronomy. Looking back on where we've been. That general principle is tragically so often true, and we see it so strongly in the West today. Moses gives a solemn warning. If we displace God from the center of our lives, very quickly other gods creep in. God at the center means we're doing what He asks us to do. The other gods of our modern age today are things like power, wealth, possessions, or status. And the whole thing just falls apart. As we see our Western societies today divided and tearing themselves apart. There's a sequence. Reverencing God, the word that used in our Bibles is so often fear, but it's not fear of terror, it's fear of reverence. That leads to a desire to obey. We take God seriously, we want to respond, and we do respond. We want to live His way, we want to put Him first, we want the best for our lives, and as He made us, He knows what's best. That's the meaning of love. If you think about it for a moment, if you really love someone, you put them first. And it all works out in practical obedience. And we find, previous chapter, verse 13, for your own good. God does not impose a rule book to cramp and crib us in life. He wants everything for the best for us all, and it's all of us, not just a select few. And we saw in chapter 10, a little further on, you're to love those who are foreigners, the people who've come in, the refugees, the people who are looking for asylum, the escapees, the have-nots, because that's the evidence we're fearing God and serving Him. We help those who have desperate needs. Now that's got a great message for us in the West today, surrounded as we are by so many in the world who need help, who are in desperation. Chapter 11, I'm setting before you a blessing and a curse. We like the word blessing. We don't like the word curse. The word there means placing someone in God's favor or under His protection. And curse is just the opposite. If you like, it's a non-blessing. We're belittling somebody, holding them in low esteem. You see, the key to success for the people of God is doing it God's way. And we in the West, amongst the people of God, have got to learn that lesson afresh. Obeying the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. That's blessing. And in terms of the people of Israel at the time, their tenancy of the land is contingent upon their obedience. And by rejecting Jesus, the leadership consigned the nation to oblivion under the hand of the Romans in AD 70. So there are two routes, blessing and curse. We do it God's way, or we think we know better, and we do it our way. People of God, doing it just our way? Yes, so often we've done that and are doing it in our Christian groups today. We do it God's way. God gives us everything we need at a personal level, a group level, a community level, to fulfill His destiny, in this case the destiny of the nation. If we don't do it God's way, God's provision is withdrawn. The whole thing falls apart. because we're not doing it, we're not fulfilling his destiny. We've decided we know better. Change it slightly and update it for ourselves, for our lives today. The people of God are given all we need to fulfill God's destiny for our lives. There's deep, deep meaning in that simple statement. But if we try to do it our way, we think we know better, well, God withdraws what we need because we're not going to our destiny. And it comes back to that word obedience. It's a practical expression of love and response. It's not negative, it's not restrictive, it's love and response. We appreciate all that God has done for us, all that Jesus has done for us in New Testament terms, and we respond. We want to do it his way. Now moving forward to this next chapter. And we've got a danger lying ahead. It all surrounds that word worship. You see, as soon as you mention the word worship, it creates all kinds of pictures in our minds depending on your church background. For some, and our media today parade it all the time, you get a man, and it usually is a man, wearing strange clothes doing strange things. In some churches, it's centered around praise bands, amplifiers and screens, with someone on a platform. Or it could be rows of people sitting in pews, listening. Some churches it's bowing before an altar. In others it's sitting quietly in contemplation. Or it may be robed choirs in majestic buildings. Or it may be just a crowd in any old building with arms raised high. These are some of the pictures we have in our minds about worship as we look at this chapter, the 2 chapters we have ahead of us. Let's scrub these pictures out and try to start with a fresh mind. That is not easy. Into chapter 12. These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess, as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, cut down the idols of their gods, and wipe out their names from these places. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, but you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you vowed to give, and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. There in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your family shall eat and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hands to, because the Lord your God has blessed you. It's our response to what he has done for us. Get rid of the wrong ways of worship. Bring in the right ways of worship, God's ways. Reject worshipping wrong things. And there's a real danger in Christian communities across the West today that we're doing that. Get God back to the center of things. The Canaanites had set up this system because their agenda was to get fertility from their crops and animals. They thought they could manipulate their gods to do this. Basically selfish. True worship simply expresses gratitude and commitment. Gratitude for all that God has done for us in Jesus, commitment to living his way, in his strength. Fundamental principles laid down here. Now look in the text in a bit more detail. We're back to the same kind of words. These are the boundary conditions, the framework of living, which expresses itself in how we treat others, the meaning of the word laws. And the word possess there has got that strong hint in the word. It's tenancy, which is expanded as long as you live in the land. They didn't do it God's way, they would lose the land. And in the end of the day, they did. You see, the lifestyle determines their future in the land. And that's got great messages for today. They lost the land in AD 70. Destroy completely, the way that it's written in the Hebrew language is to use the word twice, two different parts of speech. That means it's emphasized, and the translators have got it right, destroy completely, which gives the emphasis. But the word destroy there is the word that means sense of something undone. Their activities come to nothing. It's not wiping out people, killing people. Their activities are undone. But about Canaanite religion. The shrines were often on hills, hence the reflection of high mountains, hills. They thought it was nearer to their God. Often associated with trees, which symbolized fertility, because it was fertility worship. The altars were for sacrifice, including human sacrifice. And the pillars were standing stones that symbolized deity. And the Asherim, a plural word, trees are poles representing the goddess of fertility. And there were images of gods associated with this, often associated with fertility. Very easy to move from that to please God by introducing temple prostitution, which is what was happening. Looking at the second part, the burnt offerings were things that people gave but got in gratitude, and they were burned up in totality. The sacrifices were things that people gave, the fat was burned up, but the meat was given to feed the priests and the person who had given the gift. They were all celebrating God's goodness in the land. Here is a preparation to the people standing poised about to enter the land where they could grow their own crops, breed their own animals. They could celebrate God's goodness in the land in this way. And it's totally different in nature from Canaanite worship. The nature is different, the agenda is different, the purpose is different. Moving on. You're not to do as we do here today, everyone doing as they see fit, which is what the Canaanite religion, there were so many variants of it. Since you have not yet reached the resting place and inheritance the Lord your God is giving you. But you will cross the Jordan, settle in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from all your enemies around you, so that you will live in safety. Then to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, there you are to bring everything I command you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, and all the choice possessions you have vowed to the Lord. And there rejoice before the Lord your God. It's positive and happy. You and your sons, daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites from your towns who have no land allotted to them or any inheritance of their own, be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there observe everything I command you. There'd been a rabble of slaves wandering through the desert, living surrounding the mobile temple, the tabernacle. They were now entering into it the security of an agricultural lifestyle, and the opportunities were enormous. Be warned, says Moses, no religious free-for-all, no copying of Canaanite religious practices, and everyone's involved, including male and female servants. You see, their worship expressed their gratitude. So they gave of their very best. In an agricultural community, the very best was their animals and their crops. So in expression of their gratitude, they gave the best of these, and so it was given away completely. It was burned. Nevertheless, you may slaughter your animals in any of your towns and eat as much of the meat as you want. That's ordinary living, as if it were a gazelle or deer, according to the blessings the Lord your God gives you. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat it, but you must not eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. You must not eat it in your towns. The tithe of your corn and new wine or olive oil, or the firstborn of your herds and flocks, or whatever you have vowed to give, or your freewill offerings or special gifts. Instead, you are to eat them in the presence of the Lord your God at the place the Lord your God will choose. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites from your towns, you are to rejoice before the Lord your God in everything you put your hand to. Be careful not to neglect the Levites as long as you live in your land. Separation here between the ordinary killing of animals for food and the sacrifices they give to God, to be done in some sort of central location. Again, control. Looking at verse 14, some sort of center position. You see, in the desert, as they wandered the desert, everything was centered around this mobile temple called the tabernacle. And the tabernacle would continue on in the land for a while. If they copied the Canaanites and just did their worshipping all over the place, it's just a matter of time before it gets corrupted and they start to copy the things the Canaanites were doing. They still live there. Now here we've got some interesting phrases. Resting place and the idea of rest. Inheritance. We don't just do as we want. We do it in God's way, and there are messages here for us today in that. That was the danger then. It has happened down through history. But the danger is compromise can come out of it. Concepts of rest and inheritance, they run all over the place in the biblical text. In the context here, it really relates to security and peace from enemies in the land. But the word has a bigger meaning. In my series on Hebrews, which is online, the writer of the Hebrews develops the idea of rest much more fully. This is just going to be a superficial look at it here. Rest. Now that's the biblical concept. It's not sitting around doing nothing. The will of God brought to completion. It implies that, and the writer to the Hebrews expands this considerably. A spiritual state open to the people of God to share God's serenity in purpose and direction. We're totally in line with what He wants. We're totally in line with His resources. We're totally in line with the destiny He has for things. That's rest, not inactivity. It's got a past and present future sense, developed later in Hebrews. The Sabbath rest, when God rested. If you like, we're living in the era of God's rest, the seventh day now. The picture of today, a quality of life when we're in calm assurance of participating in God's will. We're living in line with Him, fulfilling what He has for us to do. Ponder for a moment. Every single person who's a member of the people of God, God has something, a destiny for you. Are we participating in it with calm assurance? But the future points forward to rest and security in God's presence. Let's focus on the present and just bring it to a bigger scale. That's what Moses wanted for the people. He was speaking God's mind in that. That's what God wants for you and me today. And to enter it requires working it out His way, not thinking we know better or pursuing our agreed agendas. Back to our confusion about worship. That's the danger today. And sadly, it's happening. Worship is much bigger than that. Worship means our response to what God is and has done for us. It's a response word. Seen in gratitude, celebration, and commitment. We're grateful for all that God has done for us in Jesus. We're celebrating God's provision for us in everything. And we're committing ourselves to do it His way. That's worship. And it means changing fundamentally our way of thinking and understanding. We're bringing our minds into line with His agenda, His way of thinking. And then we commit our lifestyles so that they will reflect something of the way of Jesus. That's worship. Worship is living. It is not what we do on a Sunday. Worship is living. We're living the Jesus way. We're working tirelessly, following His agenda. We're seeking to bring blessing to others, not ourselves, others, including social justice to those around. All biblically taught and major concepts. And what we do on a Sunday is a means to an end, to that end. And if it doesn't go towards that end, we need to throw it out, go back to the drawing board and ask God what He wants us to do. Moving on in chapter 12. They were gathered round the tabernacle and the ark. They didn't have much meat. They didn't have great flocks of animals. So meat eating was purely sacrificial. Now when they got into the land, killing and eating meat for their own food was separated from the tabernacle sacrifices. The sacrificial rules of the tabernacle didn't apply to ordinary living, but don't eat or drink the blood. In the time, blood symbolized life. But given the lack of refrigeration in those days, it could carry disease. Now, if you look at it historically, the temple was set up by Solomon in Jerusalem. That's quite a time later, several hundred years. But real centralization didn't actually occur till after the exile. Lots of arguments about this. Rather pointless. Moses was giving instructions to prepare the people there and then as they were about to enter the land. Given the dangers of absorbing the Canaanite practices, which were all over the place, keep it centralized around the Ark of the Covenant, which eventually was replaced by the temple. When it came to the days of Jesus, centuries later, the central temple in Jerusalem for major events and sacrifices, local synagogues were gatherings for worship and instruction. But by that time things had developed a lot further. The Lord God will cut off before you the nations you're about to invade and dispossess. But when you've driven them out and settled in their land, and after they've been destroyed before you, be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring about their gods, or back to the same problem, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? We will do the same. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, because in worshipping their gods they do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifice to their gods. See that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it. Human sacrifice had become part of their worship. Temple prostitution was rife, and there were other detestable practices. Notice God does the cutting off, but they're going to invade the land. General principle, God does it, but he does it through us when we work in obedience. And invade and dispossess, the words in the original carry the idea of taking control, not killing. It's not mass slaughter. In those days, God was seen as territorial. You still get bits of that today. So that's the danger. Go into Canaanite land, you've got to tug the forelock to the gods of the land, which leads on to absorbing the religious practices of the Canaanite peoples, which were pretty horrendous by anyone's standard. And there's a fundamental principle in all of this, much wider than this chapter, but seen in this chapter. What we worship determines our lifestyle. If we worship fertility, we end up with the fertility practices of the Canaanite people. We need to ask ourselves serious questions. What are we worshipping? Our church, our denomination, our system, our priest, our building, our way of life, prosperity, reputation, status, security, impact. It could go on. Because what we worship becomes central, dominates our thinking. That determines our lifestyle. Moses knew that, and he was communicating that so clearly to the people here. Small aside, looking at different kinds of worship. That's what the Canaanites were doing, and that can be seen in many religions today. They wanted their deity to give them good crops, good breeding. So they sought to manipulate the deity towards their agenda, and they did it through prostitution and child sacrifice. A lot of occultic worship overlapped with it, but occultic worship is here with us today. We're trying to manipulate others or life events by the use of spiritual powers, not of God. We're looking for self-improvement. Basically, we are God. You can see that in elements in humanism today. So there are spiritual exercises to develop our spirituality, whatever that may be. So we end up worshipping objects or events or mystical phenomena, and our reason is suspended. I am stunned and amazed when I look at religious beliefs. And I just ask myself, have these people suspended their mental faculties, believing that? There's the picture that Moses is presenting. It's a joyful response, gratitude. God had brought them to this place. He'd released them from slavery. He provided for them in all their desert wanderings. They didn't deserve it. They still didn't deserve it. Gratitude. And it's based on evidence. You don't suspend your mental faculties. Moses had some idea who God is, what he has done. And it's all set out in clear historical terms. Moses keeps reminding people of things of their past history, what God had done. It's not based on that. An awful lot of that goes on in the world today. Not just in religion, but sometimes in politics as well. Let's look at the evidence. Reflects the character and nature of God who is worshipped, which can be seen in what he does. Most of all today, it can be seen in who Jesus is and what he did. And worship encourages that. We need to look at our worship in our Christian communities today and ask, does it do these things? There's a picture of worship. On into chapter 13. If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you, announces to you a sign or a wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us follow other gods, gods you've not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him. Serve him and hold fast to him. That prophet or dreamer must be put to death for inciting rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. That's objective evidence. That prophet or dreamer tried to turn you away from the Lord your God commanded the way your Lord your God commanded you to follow. You must purge the evil. Your own brother or your son or daughter or the wife you love or your closest friend secretly entices you, saying, let us go and worship other gods, gods you've neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods of the people around you, whether near or far, from one end of the land to the other. Do not yield to them or listen to them. Show them no pity. Do not spare them or shield them. You must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be the first and put them to death, then the hands of all the people. Stone them to death, because they tried to turn you away from the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Then all Israel will hear and be afraid, and no one among you do such an evil thing again. And the third section of you hear it said about one of the towns your Lord your God has given you to live in. The troublemakers have arisen among you and have led the people of their town astray, saying, let us go and worship other gods, gods you have not known. Then you must inquire, probe and investigate it thoroughly. And if it's true, been proved that this detestable thing has been done among you, you must certainly put to the sword who will live in that town. You must destroy it completely, both its people and its livestock. You are to gather all the plunder of the town from the middle of the public square and completely burn the town, all its plunder as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. That town is to remain a ruin forever, never to be rebuilt. None of the condemned things to be found in your hands. Then the Lord will turn away from his fierce anger, will show you mercy, and will have compassion on you. He will increase your numbers as he promised an oath to your ancestors, because you obey the Lord your God by keeping all his commands that I am giving you today, and doing what is right in his eyes. Bringing it together, 3 sources of false worship. Moses is warning them against 3 sources. False worship at that time meant the worship of fertility gods, and that's gross sexual abuses. Think of the harm done to the young boys and young girls who were temple prostitutes. That false worship comes from 3 sources. An individual, family, society. What does this mean for us today? False worship tends to mean the worship of things like self. Oh, how we worship ourselves, our abilities and our achievements, our reputations, our status, things that we do, maybe good things we do, maybe even hobbies, maybe even sport. Or it could be material possessions, money, what we can accumulate. I've changed it from profit to spiritual deception just to broaden it slightly. And there's a lot of that going on in our society today. There are great men and women who are prophets and the people of God today. But how do you know when a prophet's telling the truth? Look at what it leads to. Does it in some way dethrone Yahweh Elohim? That's the two words in the original language to describe the God of the people of Israel. Yahweh, the God who is the God of relationship. Elohim, God, Creator and Sovereign. The Lord God. Does it dethrone God in any way from his central place in our lives? Look at the priorities in our lives, and you can test it very easily by time, how long we spend in it. And money. How do we spend our money? Is God at the center of all of that? Practical way is, when a prophet or a spiritual leader in any way speaks something, does it enhance the reputation of Jesus? Maybe it enhances the reputation of the speaker from a platform. And we, the people of God, have been guilty of almost deifying some of our speakers. Does it enhance the reputation of Jesus when we apply what the person says? Fundamental principles. Now, in the Bible as a whole, there are two tests for prophetic direction. One is New Testament. You find it in 1 John chapter 4. Again, I have a series on that book. Does it glorify Jesus? What they're saying, how they're saying it, what they're saying we should do, the outcomes from it. And does it come true? We'll look at that when we get to chapter 18. Both have to be fulfilled. The fact that it comes true doesn't prove that it's right. But if it doesn't come true, it's certainly wrong. But does it glorify Jesus in the practical outworking of prophetic direction? But this chapter raises again very big ethical issues. How can we justify the draconian punishments that are listed here? Punishments that are being applied to the people of God. They're dire. They're pictured in extreme terms. We've got to remember this is the use of language, and language of a few thousand years ago. Can be described that way. There is no evidence that this kind of stoning and putting every whole population of a town to the sword ever took place, or was ever recommended to take place. What Moses is saying is, this is what God thinks of this kind of behavior. Take it seriously. Stamp it out. And the key lies when we look at verse 15 to 17. You must destroy it completely, both its people and its livestock. You're to gather all the plunder of the town into the middle of the public square and completely burn the town, all its plunder, as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. That town is to remain a ruin forever, never to be rebuilt, and none of the condemned things to be found in your hands. And the key rests in these little words and phrases. Destroy it completely. Condemned things. And here is the subtlety of language coming in yet again. It's herem in the original language, a word that's difficult to translate, and destroy it completely is harem. Condemned things are those that have been destroyed completely, harem. But it can also be devoted totally. It's not brutality. It's taking things seriously and stamping it out so they don't control. They have no place in the community of God's people. There are standards to be adhered to, standards of behavior and practice that we must follow. And alternatives must be stamped out totally. That's the point that Moses is making. And the word carries the idea of totally set apart for God for his purposes and service. It's a positive idea. Get rid of these wrong and evil things that are causing damage because they hurt people, they damage people, they brutalize people. Stamp them out. And so graphic hyperbole, use of the language, is used here by Moses to make this point very clearly to his audience. Summarizing it that way, smashing up the religious things that are wrong. There must be no compromise with wrong belief systems. They lead to wrong practices. Judge belief systems by what they lead to. Judge religions by how they treat people outside that religion. No compromise. Harsh note to end on, but it's positive. Important that we get God back at the center of our Christian communities. His will, his way of doing things, what he wants, his agendas, but in particular restoring the quality of lifestyle of Jesus among his people. That's God's purpose. That's our destiny. That's what God wants for us. Let's pursue it. And in the next presentation, we're going to start looking at how it is pursued in practical living. Positive, wholesome, living the God way. Living the way of Jesus before the watching world. What a wonderful picture.